to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Today is December 2nd. Can you believe it? We're almost finished with 2015. And, Wednesdays is our interview days, and I am very excited to let you know that we are interviewing Dana Durnford, a.k.a. the nuclear proctologist. It's a very exciting show for me to interview Dana. He is one of the really outstanding activists we have in fighting the nuclear cartel. I don't know if many of you know about Dana Durnford, but he had a YouTube channel, and he was very concerned. He's been on the Fukushima disaster since the very first day. He was actually one of the few people who actually put out a warning to the people in Japan. He lives in the Canada and British Columbia in Canada, and he was so concerned he put out a video to the people of Japan warning them as soon as he saw the video. And he has been on this day one. And let me just introduce you to Dana. Dana, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lonnie. Thank you for a great intro.
Yeah, well, thank you. First, I want to introduce people to who you are. And one of the things that I found fascinating, because I have been following you on the YouTube channel, and now I follow your live stream at livestream.com at Dana Durnford, is that you seem to have a vast knowledge of the isotopes, the radioactivity. I mean, tell us why you understood how catastrophic Fukushima is. Give us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. Well, when you think about multi-nuclear reactors, there wasn't much literature out there, just Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island per se. But there was a lot of literature out there on studies on animals and studies on radiation. But depleted uranium in munitions was a 1991. It was used heavily. We consider it the first time, even though that's not official, but a lot of people quote it as the first time that we know depleted uranium was used in combat. And that was used on what they call the Highway of Death outside of Kuwait. And they shot around 700 tons. And a Japanese physicist at a Hamburg conference estimated that it was the animosity equivalent of 44,000 Nagasaki bombs worth of radiation was in that 700 tons.
In Kuwait.
That was outside of Kuwait in 1991 during the Gulf War. There was 300,000 of the Ba'ath. Saddam's Ba'ath party was leaving Kuwait with they robbed the jewelries, the booties, the Rolls Royces, etc., Lamborghinis and everything, and they were heading back towards Iraq after a short invasion, like a very short invasion.
And Dana, my mouth is falling open. This is actually the first time That's not commonly known that we used depleted uranium in the
Right,
first Gulf War. How did
right.
you find out about it?
I long since forgot. It was veterans that had come back from the war, were
Wow.
talking about the war. And during that war, they never gave the soldiers live ammunition until they were ready to go into battle. And this was because of Vietnam, where there was over 10,000 of the commanders were killed by the troops. And that's literally what stopped the war, was the troops were killing their leaders because they were forcing them to carry out atrocities in that country, of course. And that was another reason why they stopped chemtrailing the skies over Vietnam. You know, they chemtrailed those skies with Agent Orange for 9 years with these great big B-52s. That was their. It's not the first time we've seen that kind of chemtrailing, but it was the first time we've seen it at that extensive. That was a gas war. But anyway, back to Kuwait. And so the soldiers, when they first came up after all the firing was done, they arrived on that scene. Everything was on fire and smoking and everything. And people began to, within 72 hours, the majority of the crews that were in that section had got open sores and violently sick. And so Dr. Doug Rourke, he was he was dispatched by the Pentagon to try to clean up the depleted uranium after. And he had made a lot of dissertations and presentations throughout America about that. And that's where I kind of started picking up on that this was an issue. But this was after the fact now, mind you. That wasn't 1991. But this was after the fact that I had picked up on this documentation and started going down that rabbit hole. But the reason I actually understand nuclear so well is actually a lot further than that, and it's something I really don't talk about very much at all anyway. And it's not digression, I guess, in one sense. But for a history of me, I was diving, commercial diver. I was on the ocean 121 days, 28 days straight, 6 hours a day on the ocean floor when I got injured. It's around 15, almost 16 years ago. And so once I got really severely injured and incapacitated for over a decade.
Wow.
And I had home care for years and years and years. But I had a lot of loved ones and friends that filled in the gap after, and that's why I exist today. Now, I started looking at nuclear online. I don't know what year exactly that was, but and so I started collecting lectures from online from the major institutions. And so anything to do with nuclear, even like I know there was this one presentation out of Harvard I was watching. I have over 7,000 lectures on nuclear. But one of these presentations, there was a professor, I can't remember, I used to know his name all to pieces. But anyway, he was talking about how he went to the pawn shop and he bought certain lenses, older lenses. And these lenses had isotopes at the front of the lens. And the idea of the isotope was to keep dust off the lens. Now, this kind of stuff, you would need an enormous amount to make a dirty bomb, say, for instance.
Right.
But it showed how that it had infiltrated many aspects of life. And he had talked about a few more of those. But it was just in the context of uses of the isotopes. And so at this time, I was still pretty naive, and I was looking at the beneficiaries of this material. And I thought, how fascinating that something like that could be used to keep dust off a lens. And it just seemed such a novel, brilliant, and wonderful idea. But as I started going down that road, and I accumulated over 7,000 lectures, we get up to, at that time, that was just after 9/11, or just before 9/11 that I got injured. And so just after September 11th event, and then we went to war. And so by now, I'm looking at this, I'm learning all this stuff right away, and I'm trying to work out my mind. But there was a statement made by Anderson Cooper during the original Iraqi shock and awe. And what he was, this was just several days after when the shock and awe was in full swing. And I noticed, I had watched this a number of days, But each day there was the same cloud was lingering in the background of the hotel where he was shooting. He was always shooting the cameras from the same direction, so to speak. But on the sixth day, he commented on this strange cloud, and Dr. Doug Rourke had come out about it, and he had mentioned the cloud that was hanging over Iraq was the depleted uranium cloud, and which is what at the time what I felt, but I didn't figure I was like sharp enough to be able to really, call that shot, right? So
Yeah.
So anyway, what happened was during the Iraqi war, because we moved ahead, of course, but during the Iraqi war, they started using depleted uranium unhinged. And now they were getting most of the uranium from McAllister's bomb manufacturer, and McAllister with an A in Oklahoma. Now, we know that in the Iraqi war, they were firing 5.5 million rounds a month. And a large chunk of this was coming from McAllister's. And so this was dirty bombs they were firing on other people's properties, other people's homes. And that the children, to me, here's how I seen all this. This is what really got me upset, was I seen all these children in videos going into the homes and coming out with their little toys and their blankets and their little books or whatever the case may be that a child would covet. And to me, that was contaminated.
Right.
Right. And so here I was yelling at the TV screen, don't pick it up.
Yeah.
Because, like, I understood, right? And I was so frustrated. At those days, because I was still disabled from my accident, I would throw things across the room in frustration. And so I figured that I had to educate myself to get out of that frustration. And so I really went down a rabbit hole. Now, for me, nuclear was a way to escape my hospital bed. Was a way to escape the fact that I just lost a couple of $100,000 a year job, and that, if I didn't get injured, I'd be looking at $600,000 a year within 2 years of that, and within a couple of years of that, I'd be looking at $1 million a year job, and only working, say, 4 months a year. And so I was looking at the big times, $25,000 an hour jobs, and I had earned that position. I had worked my way all the way up to that.
Wow.
Right, you know what I'm saying?
I didn't even know there were jobs like that in the fishing industry.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, no, this is diving, like you say. So diving is different.
Diving, yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely dangerous.
Wow.
And that's why I'm in a wheelchair.
Obviously, yeah, obviously.
You put a big enough cart in front of a donkey, he'll walk till he drops. A donkey. And in every sense of that word, right? But, I grew up in that environment. I come from a place that don't have no automobiles. And so I'm one, in every sense of the word, I'm one with nature. And so I'm one of those people that still covet nature and still respect nature, and that my footprint was very small when I was growing up in nature, and that it was the way of the land that I grew up in. I grew up in that last generation, so to speak, of living on the land where we didn't have supermarkets and we didn't have shops and we didn't have access to there was no such thing as a chocolate bar, even though there was in the communities.
Where were you?
Well, there's a lot of things I'm not going to give out because I'm attacked constantly.
Yeah, I get that.
And there's a little tiny community of 170 people still got no automobiles, and I'm not going to have them vilified. Yeah. You know what I mean? By the nasties that are riding me all the time.
Yeah.
But they ride me because they can't debunk anything I say, and they can't disregard anything I say, and the only thing left is to attack the messenger itself. And so they're extremely, they love that because you don't have to think about that when they can say anything as long as it's malicious, as long as it smears me or sows doubt. And that's fine too, in one sense, right? But it does show that they don't have a narrative that can beat my narrative, not even one of my sentences. And so they went through 500 hours of my videos recently, and found a couple of sentences, and then used that to charge me with a crime. Now, the Canadian media pounced on me. I was charged with criminal harassment of people who said there was no radioactive fallout in North America. And in every sense of the word, that's a badge of honor. But on the flip side, here it was with, who knows, not that many, but videos on my site that had their name in it. And I was given an ultimatum to stay in jail or to take down their videos within 24 hours. But to accomplish that and get the social media cleaned up and everything else, because I've been at this for many, many years, I couldn't take a chance because I had so much work to do. 24 hours wasn't enough to do anything. And then my presentations are an hour long each. And so you can't get through 300 hours to find out if you mention these people. So I had to pull everything.
Wow.
Yeah. And now a
Well,
week
you know that
before
would
that,
also
so
that
my
there's kind of a double there they get a double dip with forcing you to do that because they get to demonize all of the social media activists who aren't part of this, establishment anti-nuclear movement. They get along with you, they one fell swoop disregard all of your hard work. Now explain this because this is really fascinating. Let me give some a little bit of background here. Dana had been doing these daily feeds, and maybe it was about a year ago, Dana, where you just were sick of just doing this reporting, and you said, "Look, we have to go out to the coast to see what's out there. We can't just keep saying it's going to kill the coast. We need to get this done." So you started a crowdfunding effort to get a vehicle, a little dinghy boat, I think that's what it's called, and
sure
literally, Dana went up and down the coast 1,500 miles, covered it
15,000,
15,000
yeah,
miles. 15,000 miles. I mean,
260 days,
exactly. And
5 months without coming home one trip,
and videotaped it, had an underwater camera, did videotapes.
200,000 pictures of the
Yeah.
coastline tidal zones. We went and inspected the nursery of the ocean, yeah.
Tell people what's out on the West Coast. What did you find?
Well, and so
Go ahead.
I think most people should, when I talk to people in my own personal life, they kind of get when I say to them, well, there's supposed to be 5,600 species on the BC coastline. They are considered the indigenous population, and that would include, say, 600 algae, kelps, 480 species of worms, 78 species of starfish, 76 species of sea anemones, 70 species of sponges, etc., etc., etc. Now, they are considered the indigenous population. And that 6,500 invertebrates would live amongst that in the tidal. This is the tidal zones we're talking about. And 6,500 invertebrates without the backbones. They're like little shrimps. But these are considered the indigenous population. There's actually over 4 million other species right there, but there's no room left, right? So every morsel of territory in the tidal zones itself is taken up by the 5,600 and the 6,500 invertebrates. So that's not counting, periwinkles and snails and mollusks and scallops and abalones and oysters and little necks, manillas, clams and
Anchovies,
razorbacks and
sardines,
gooey
all the
ducks,
stuff.
and not counting the fish itself, but just counting the tidal zone and the species that are residential. Now,
Okay.
and because once they disappeared, then what the ocean's supposed to do is fill up that gap. And so it works this way: if you plowed in a mile of a healthy coastline, it would come up from deeper on both sides, and the ocean as a super life would have receded it itself, and so no harm done. And we see examples of that on ice coastlines where you get heavy ice in the winter, and so the wind's blowing a big pack ice, 200 miles of pack ice wide, and thousands of miles of ice up on the coastline, and it scrubs the coastline. Now, if you go back in the summertime, it has repopulated that entire thing completely. Every millimeter is plugged with life. And so the Pacific Ocean didn't recede the coastline with the other 4 million species. Now, what that meant was that we had broken the food chain permanently. Now, but also when you look down the rabbit hole, you find out that the sardines are gone, the herring are gone, the anchovies are gone, the squid are gone, the
Yeah.
krill are gone, and that also the birds were gone through the coastline.
Yes.
The 148 migratory and the 149 residential. These are rough numbers, but very close. And
I'll tell you, I can attest to that. I live in Oregon. I'm about 50 miles from the ocean. You go to the ocean, there's very few birds. They have closed down crabbing, fishing off the coast. They're in a state of devastation, and they're in complete denial about what's causing it. But let me talk to you. Let me transition this into this. You alerted me to this morning when I called you. I hadn't had a time to look at E&E News.
I was just going to bring it up to you. Yeah, go ahead.
This is exactly why Dana has a fire in him that can't stop, no matter how much intimidation and manipulation, because these charges that have been brought against him. I participated in many of his online feeds, which they're using as evidence against him.
You donated $800 to my defense too.
Yes, I did, because I believe in you, Dana, and I think it's very important that we do donate to your defense, because honestly, this is how the nuclear
It's a good thing
cartel,
you did, yeah.
well, this
A
is
lot
how,
of people did originally, but they came out. Go ahead, Lonnie.
well, what happens is this is how the nuclear cartel really basically keeps us silent. They get people to attack us on the social media, and then they intimidate us with legal lawsuits. I mean, this is a clear case of legal intimidation, because the charges you've been accused of have been grossly exaggerated and
Well, they went through 500 hours of my videos to find a couple of sentences.
manipulated them and
It's
manipulated them.
stupid. They
It
haven't got a
is.
leg to stand on.
Yes.
They can't beat me in court. But
Well,
they're going to make me. They're going to run me through that meat
Well,
grinder.
not only that, but their video, their quote evidence video, is now circulating on social media, so that anybody it's out there, so people are already prejudging what you're saying.
Well, they demonized me in the media, and accused me of death threats. I'm not
Right?
charged with death threats. I didn't make
That's
death
right.
threats. And
That's right.
so, why are people doing that to me? Why is the
That's right.
biggest media in Canada, bar nothing, doing that to me? And why is the Japanese Times doing it to me? And then
Right.
why was that parroted out by the pro-nuclear crowd? Why did
You
they?
mean the anti-nuclear crowd?
No, the pro-nuclear crowd parroted it out that I was charged with death threats when I'm not. I'm
Because
charged with criminal harassment, big whoop, of nuclear lapdogs, nuclear scumbags. And so I'm not going to withdraw any of my comments because I don't have any reason to. As a Canadian, I'm entitled to call it a freak, if that's what I choose to call it. And in this case, I'm correct in every context
Well,
of
this
that
is the
word.
interesting thing. These charges of criminal harassment against you, I've thought this was interesting, because we're talking about an entire industry that is literally harming the planet. This
And killed in the Pacific Ocean.
they're complaining about you, talking aggressively towards someone. How aggressive is this? Unstoppable contamination of Pacific Ocean is seriously menacing West Coast. Fukushima is now undeniably a global security issue. Can't be brought under control by a single state. A wave of radiation will be 10 times more than the entire world's nuclear tests combined. That kind of says it all.
Somebody's getting spanked this morning, I assure you.
Yeah.
How did that?
This all came from, what's his name, Mitsuishi Murata, former Japanese ambassador to Switzerland.
Yeah, and he's on top of that.
I mean, that is not just somebody just making some
And
offhanded remark.
Switzerland just opened its freshwater fishery 2 years ago after being closed for 26 years because of Chernobyl. And of course, Chernobyl's a candlestick, literally just a candlestick compared to Fukushima. And Chernobyl, you still can't sell the land in parts of UK, Ireland, and Scotland, or drink the milk, or eat the meat because of the fallout from Chernobyl. Once again, Chernobyl stopped after 10 days, and Chernobyl was equal to 400 Hiroshima bombs. And so when they say it's 10 times all the bomb testing, it's probably that every week.
Yes.
Because under the Chernobyl scale, Fukushima's around 1,080 Hiroshima bombs a day under that same model. Once again, Chernobyl stopped after 10 days. Japan didn't. These reactors didn't. And it wasn't just the Fukushima Daiichi military-industrial complex's plant. It was many of the reactors in the tsunami.
Right.
Once you don't get power to a reactor for 90 minutes, it's done. And you can't get in there. That's why they're still at Chernobyl. And the only reason they got a sarcophagus over Chernobyl was because it stopped after 10 days. And if you want to call it a sarcophagus, I can't call it a sarcophagus, but people do refer to it as one, but it's full of holes. There is no stopping this stuff. If you try to contain those gases, these are noble gases, it will detonate. So there's no such thing as a sarcophagus.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. You can't contain it. Even the sarcophagus is to use for storage has to be vented. Everything at WIP was vented and is still vented. And everything is at all the nuclear waste sites is vented because of the noble gases. They only need oxygen to detonate. They don't need a flame or a spark. And so they have to vent it, right? And that's why repositories can't work. But there's a huge amount of money to keep the lie alive.
This is why this former Japanese ambassador said this was quoted in the article. It says, the ongoing radioactive contamination of the sea with no prospect for a solution is dishonoring Japan, causing it to be criticized for harming the global environment. In spite of this, attempts are shamefully being made to hide Fukushima. That is really the hallmark of the nuclear cartel. They hid the catastrophe in Chernobyl by refusing to allow the World Health Organization to go in there for 5 years, which is
Right.
why now they say it takes 5 years to get cancer because they didn't look for 5 years.
But there's 1,800 autoimmune deficiencies show up first. Kofi Annan said in 2002 at UN that there was 3 million children in Ukraine with permanent disabilities because of Chernobyl.
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
And the New York Academy of Science published 3,500 peer-reviewed studies translated from Ukraine that shows over 1 million people died from cancers. But once again, there's 1,800 autoimmune deficiencies will show up before cancers. And so it's not just 1 million. There's a possible, tens of millions of people that are suffering from other autoimmune, not possibly, but are suffering. Now, if you look at the fallout from Chernobyl, that went right around the entire planet, and it was a big plume that spread out, but it was still a one plume. And just because it stopped after 10 days, that plume still continues to circle the planet in the upper and lower tropospheres. Yeah. And it takes, if you just had a single plume, just one plume, it's really bad for the entire planet. Now, and it's bad because we took the stuff that is indigenous to our universe, the elements that are indigenous, and we added extra electrons to it. And so once you added through a neutron bombardment, once you added that extra electron to the element, you gave it a new atomic weight. Now nothing on the planet has a chromosome or has a key to deal with it. Right. And so generally we live in harmony with everything on the planet. But when you added the extra man-made electron atomic weight numbers to these things, that's it never changes. So even if it did decay a billion years to lead, which is what this stuff allegedly does, when it comes to changing the atomic weight, it's no longer the lead from the solar system. Like the sun creates it, we destroy it, the elements. And so the lead that's coming from the sun, for instance, is different than the lead that's left over after the chain reaction of fissionable products is reached their 10-year life cycle, 10 times their life cycle. But they tell you a lie that like iodine lasted 8 days, but it has 10 half-life, so that's 80 days. But because it has the extra, and this is important, because it has the extra electron attached to it, that's a perpetual machine. It doesn't stop at 10. That goes on for infinity because it has that new atomic weight. And so it's no longer acting the way they said. So everything that was released will remain bad till the end of time, till the very end of time. But that's why we have a non-space proliferation. It's because we recognize that this stuff is not indigenous to space, and that we haven't found it in our periodic tables throughout space that we recognize. Therefore, and because they took the original elements and just added that atomic number, our body still treats it and accepts it like normally. So, like strontium acts like calcium, goes to the bones, and potassium acts like
cesium. It acts like potassium, right?
Right, and that goes into the muscles, sequesters into the organs and everything else. But it has an extra electron, and so that's how come we are affected by it, because we still accept it. Right. Our body doesn't say, hey, it's not like a nail in your body where your body, but in one sense it is, but it's able to sneak its way into your body, but your body will attack it even though it seems natural. Now your body floods itself with white blood cells immediately until the end of time, and that displaces the oxygen molecule, making people lazy and lethargic and everything else and not feeling well and more susceptible to other. And that's what brings on the 1,800 autoimmune deficiencies like diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, heart and lungs, respiratory problems. These show up long before the cancer, but the cancer is still growing. It just takes 10, 15, 20 years for that to manifest.
And in the meantime, your quality of life is grotesquely diminished. That's the thing that they don't talk about.
And when you're bioaccumulating it, then your body every day, because you're bioaccumulating it now every day, your body has to pump out more white blood cells to deal with the new intake.
Right.
Right. And
the bioaccumulation is something people need to understand, because there's still people out there eating fish. John Goffman explained this in his book Poison Power. A fish swimming through the ocean needs potassium. There's very little potassium in the ocean. So what the mechanism of a fish does is it multiplies the potassium by 1,000 times in its body to get the potassium it needs. So when it sees cesium 137, 134, it thinks it's potassium. So what does it do? It magnetizes the cesium 137, 134 1,000 times. He said it's far more dangerous to to eat a fish than it is to drink a gallon of contaminated water for that
reason. Bioaccumulation.
Yeah. Yes, people need to understand this is not. And
fish are not going to roll over dead. They're accumulating, and when we eat it, we transfer it because it's sequestered into their meat and in their muscles, and that's
And it's way more dangerous. And really, we can protect ourselves, but we just have. I mean, we're living. This is why this show is named The Age of Fission. We are now living in the age of fission, as this article highlights.
We have to deal with it,
There is no getting out of it, folks. Like, we really now live in.
You can't ignore it anymore.
No. And
sorry, Lonnie.
That's all right.
I'll kill that after.
Okay. Well, let me ask you.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for our listeners? You know, a lot of people don't like to listen to this information because they're like, it makes me feel like death and gloom. And
right now, yeah.
Yeah.
They'll be searching for this all day, every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Go, Lonnie. Pot calling kettle.
Yeah, there you go.
We're both understanding. I don't feel bad.
I don't know who that is. Is that me or are you ringing?
That was you.
I wonder who's ringing. I have no idea.
It's my number. It was a California number. I'll call him back after.
Okay.
And so, like, what people got to start doing is understanding that you can't escape this, but you can change a lot of the outcomes for a while yourself.
For what we do.
For like Fukushima is just boat I was going after one time. Fukushima has killed off the Pacific Ocean, and the last whale will be dead in about a year's time, if that long. They're starving to death. All the whales that have the mass die-offs we see, and the birds and the seals and the sea lions, they were dependent upon krill. And krill is what the migratory animals would use to move 4,000 or 5,000 miles. They would just go along with the sardines or the anchovies or the squid. And I mean, I'll answer that. Hey, I'm doing a radio interview. You're going to have to call back in an hour's time or something.
Well, it looks like me and Dana are on the same
I'm on the radio here doing an interview, and
everybody calls us at 8:30. That's what happens with me and Dana. People just give us a call.
I'm doing a radio interview as we're talking, so we're live. Okay, you take care, man. Call me back in about an hour. Is that okay? Okay.
There you go.
Bye-bye.
That's all right. Me and you, Dana, people start calling me right about 8:30.
People phone me.
Yeah.
That's I try to answer everything all the time. And I don't begrudge anybody for calling me at any time.
I'm the same.
But the trolls do call me a lot too. And some people say, well, how can you have sushi bars if the ocean is dead? I said, well, there's fish from other ocean, for starters. And there is fish left in the ocean. They're further up the food chain. They accumulate. They're not like the tidal pools. They don't get... What I'm talking about is tidal pools. I'm not talking about... But we are talking about the fish. The anchovies are gone. I mean, they failed 3 years in a row, period. Nothing. Not even a single one. And the sardines and the squid and the herring, these are the most important converters of the krill, because the krill are converting the phytoplankton and the zooplankton and the pods and the microscopic world. And so people don't understand a lot of those cycles that the ocean used to have 1 billion creatures in a glass of salt water. And that's also eggs and larvae and everything else. And so radiation is able to destroy that stuff. We see headlines of where phytoplankton is bioaccumulating radiation, right? But there's a conflict here. Under normal circumstances, if it's just a little bit released and it's not hot particles, that could hold true. But when you talk about hot particles that are coming out of Japan, and that's what they are, because they use this mixed oxide of fuel there, and then they poured salt water on these reactors. And when you pour salt water on a reactor, you created a sulfur effect from the salt water. It's a sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyball. And a buckyball is kind of like a soccer ball in shape, or configurations. And what you ended up with was something that was able to ingest an atom. And you put 2 million atoms in the head of a needle, but you can't see it. But that's 2 million cancers distributed out when they've been bombarded with neutrons and accept electrons. And that's what nuclear does. That's what the chain reaction is all about.
So, excuse me, Dana, I know that you have talked about the buckyballs and you just said it to me again. Could you repeat that? Because I'm a completely non-scientific person. I struggle in school to pass my science classes. This
Right.
thing about the buckyballs is kind of very hard for me to comprehend.
Yeah. Okay, so when the earthquake came through the country, at 9,000 miles per hour. It hit Florida in 30 minutes. It shook the country for 6 minutes. It was considered 1,000 times worse than Haiti. Now, then the tsunami came through the country and it took out the infrastructure of the country. Now, they weren't able to get fresh water into these places. They need external power to run these operations. So they lost external power. They lost their emergency power supply because of 45 feet of water, swamped everything, and swept away the fuel tanks and all this other stuff. But it also turned the whole country, put it through a wood chipper. And, right, yeah. And so as a last-ditch effort, they flew in big pumps and even trucks, and they dropped them in.
Yeah,
They ran
it. Miracle Cure. I remember feeling very.
But this was a long time later. Everything had already atomized in aerosol and gone through a chain reaction and disappeared.
Right.
This was a desperate attempt to save Japan, trying to save the country, trying to stay on the site. And that's what they struggle with every day. That's why they only send in the homeless, because they're sacrificed. Okay, so the buckyballs, so they never had fresh water, and you need like hard water. This is a special type of water for the fuel rods.
Uh-huh.
And so what they done was they sprayed salt water and pumped it out of the ocean. But during the 1950s and 60s, the open ocean testing, there was a phenomenon known about salt water and the sulfur, the way it acts. It creates a little ball, and the ball is 1/10,000th of a millionth of a meter. And so if you took a meter and divided by a million, and then you took one of those millionths and you divided it by 10,000. So, okay, so it's very tiny, and it would seem harmless and innocuous and benign, but it's not. What it does now is it's able to ingest a radioactive atom or particle. Because you got to realize these are extraordinary temperatures they're spraying in on top of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 degree temperatures. And so when the water is getting close to that, the sulfur creates a little tiny ball. But this ball ingests a radioactive element, particle, atom, isotope is in the atom. And now the little ball becomes like a little nuclear engine. Now these sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs from these enormous temperatures and these maniacal particles create it's like a little nuclear engine. So instead of an atom, you got an atom surrounded by a ball. And once again, you put 2 million atoms on the head of the needle, you can't see it.
Uh-huh.
But now the ball it has this phenomenon where it's not solutable in water, but it kind of is, but it's able to be reliberated easily. And it's easily transportable. Wow. And so the shape of the ball, think of a kite. So think of a ball, and you want to, just like any kind of a ball, a soccer ball or a baseball or anything like that. And so you're not going to see that float across the ocean, right? But if you took the ball and put it on a kite, it might make it across the ocean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's what the radioactive atoms is doing.
That's what's sulfur. In the plumes. That's what these plumes are. So that's how they know it's a plume, because they can see it through the buckyballs.
No, it's modeling.
Okay.
Yeah, but they can fly through it and find it, and they did, and wow. we know that we got the modelings that were leaked out and that were discovered to be official too, and so the balls are able to travel huge distances. Now, if you think about forest fires in Asia or pollution in Asia and the Trans-Pacific Corridor, how that comes across the Pacific without hitting the jet streams. And so there's a corridor that comes right across the ocean, as well known, but these particles are tens of thousands of times bigger than the particles we're talking about. But yet dust and pollution, forest fire has no problem coming to North America and adding to the indexes of pollution. And it also well studied and well known how that comes over and lingers,
Right.
particularly over California, but over in North America for several months before it starts to disperse out. So if you go back to the stories of the releases originally, and that, okay, let me get back on track. So for over 40 days, they sprayed salt water on these reactors. Now, what that also means to everybody was you made these particles highly transportable, but at the same time, because it's fissionable product, now fissionable product can consume everything around it forever. Think of it as the sun. And so it's cannibalizing rebar and rocks and steel and water, and mud and everything, but it's turning that into atoms. Now you can a gram of the rods themselves produces more atoms than every grain of sand on every beach on the planet. And so when it's consuming the rocks and the rebar and the steel, it's ionizing and radiating them with neutrons bombardments. So it's taking those original elements that weren't in the chain reaction but are exposed to the fissionable products now because it escaped as containment, cannibalized that, and that is the same as nuclear bombs going off. And so, but nuclear bombs are, uh, they burn at multi-millions of degrees for a few seconds, or a split second, or whatever the case may be. And so in one sense, they're able to consume a lot of it. So about 5% of it is atomized in aerosol, and the rest of it falls to Earth, so to speak. And
Wow.
but because of what we're doing in Japan is not a bomb. Everything is atomized and aerosoled and released. Is not consumed at millions of degrees temperatures. It's just creating nuclears. So when it's in a chain reaction, that's why Chernobyl was equated with 400 Hiroshima bombs. And so they didn't have 400 Hiroshima bombs worth of material in the reactor. And if the reactor had lasted another 10 days, it would have been 800 Hiroshima bombs because it was consuming everything around it and atomizing and aerosoling that. And that is what the dispersal was. And so the models that we look at are only the releases from the fuel pools themselves, not the cannibalizations of the materials. And so every time you have an earthquake down there, its stuff is falling down on these melted reactor cores and coriums. They're coriums now that they melted down. And they're being cannibalized and atomized and aerosoled. And so it's an enormous amount of material that was originally released. Of course, during the detonations, that's when most of it was released, you would assume. But because they're in a chain reaction, over short periods of time, they release more than they originally released. And so this is a perpetual motion machine. This
So
is a
let me ask you, Dana. We've got about 10 more minutes to speak, or 15 more minutes, but I wanted to ask you this. What action, first off, what action do you think the world's governments, what do you think that the world's governments ought to be doing? And I'm going to ask you twofold so that you can kind of roll into it. What can people listening, what actions can we take? Because this is a catastrophic event. So what should the world's governments be doing? Let's talk about that. Really, what are they not doing? We know that they're lying, and they're just ignoring it, pretending like it does not exist.
Well, we need to sacrifice about 6 million people, and they will die a terrible death. And we also need to sacrifice our future, and we need to move on this immediately. And we have to treat this as a meteorite
And
coming
what
on
do
our
you mean,
planet.
sacrifice our future? What do you talk? When you say that, what do you mean? What do we need to do? We need to
We don't
send
have
people,
we don't we
like
don't
we
have
did in Chernobyl. People go in for 30 seconds to do something, or like how? What's the?
sacrificing our future is the normal person out there who don't understand the subject very well. They think about their retirement. They think about buying a boat or going on
Yeah.
vacations and stuff like that. That is history. That doesn't exist anymore. And people will come to terms to this in the next year or so when the last whale has died. We have to go to war against all nuclear on the planet and contain it. We have to try to restore this planet, and
Right.
and that's the only way we can restore ourselves or the species that are left or save anything is we got to go to battle against Fukushima, and then we have to deal with all the other stuff that is buried in lakes and landfills and dumped in the ocean. And so we're literally in a cartoon land where our whole future is dependent upon everybody working in harmony to deal with this. We have to treat it as a meteorite coming at our planet. And so like in North America, we can have 4,300. And a lot of people might say, holy shit, this is like drama load, Dana. No, this is reality. This is a fact that the ocean didn't recede the coastline. And the implications of that are as dramatic as any meteorite coming at our planet and then some. This is an extinction event. And so we have to double down. And there is no way back. And there might not be a way forward. And there is no way forward without sacrificing at least 6 million people killing them people. A lot of them will die within hours. But the longer we wait, the more we're going to need.
I'm kind of confused by that. What do you mean? What actions? How do you know that? Like immediately, what are you suggesting there?
I'm suggesting 6 million people go into Fukushima and contain it and deal with it.
That's really what needs to happen. Is we need people.
We ought to need to send the people in.
We need masses, and the reason we're going to need 6 million is because people are going to die pretty quickly as soon as they get in there. So
your arms will melt in a couple of minutes.
We just need a bunch of brave people to just go in there and go deal with whatever it is.
Just like at Chernobyl, where people ran out on the roof for 15 seconds and never went near a nuclear plant after. But, all these years later, we see the devastation from that. But we know that there was unimaginable amounts of... They were picking people up off the streets in buses.
Right.
Just get on the bus with a gun to their head. You're going to Chernobyl.
Right.
And that's a fact. They went through 1 million people there. But they got away with it, with 1 million people, only because... like 600 of the pilots all died. But they got away with it in Chernobyl because the chain reaction, the elephant foot, stopped after 10 days.
Right.
And that was to the work of 600 helicopter pilots.
Right.
Who sacrificed their lives to dump boric acid.
To save the planet, essentially.
Yeah, they did. They did so.
But
really they don't want to admit that. They don't want to admit that. But I know better. And I can prove it anytime I had to.
I mean, people say that there was really not very many people harmed. Nobody's died in Japan, and there's really those kinds of statements infuriate me because
they should be locked up.
It is really a crime against humanity. It's a crime against life.
People.
I mean, it is really, and this is how we end up getting angry and making excessive statements because really these people are killing the planet, and we're not supposed to be angry.
It's not excessive. You say you got to change the law to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't make no excessive statements. I didn't even allude to those. Everything I said, and I refuse to withdraw any of my comments, were in the complete context of what I'm allowed to say as a Canadian, legally and morally and ethically.
It is moral. And this is the thing that really blows me away. This is a health issue, a public health issue that nobody, like we have.
You can't ignore it much longer.
And you know what? Like we might have one or two generations where we can keep pretending, but after 2 generations, it's going to be, if we have any humans.
Can't pretend in another year. You're going to get superstorms too, right? We got superstorms coming our way. We've seen what happened in Tonga. We've seen what happened in the Philippines. We've seen what just happened in Mexico. And these were extraordinary. We've seen models of that from Mars. We've never seen it on Earth. There are a couple of places on Earth where it hits 200 miles an hour in valleys, but not in storms. Right? We've never seen that. We've seen 30 million coconut trees, not the coconuts, but the trees turn into projectiles in the Philippines. That is something we never seen before. This was a 100-mile wide F5 tornado. That struck here, we're done. That will wipe us out like you can't imagine. And we've seen this. This is definitive. This is caused by the radiation. Now, we got no ice in the mountains in British Columbia, Canada.
Wow.
And so the fish never made it up the salmon couldn't make it up the river even if they did show up.
Right.
And, my kid had to put down a beer a few weeks ago when they were doing a salmon species count. He was the guide. He's also a skipper that takes out fisheries and oceans to do tests over many years. But now all of a sudden he's up in the river. They carry a gun because there is a lot of bears up there. But they've never had this happen before. There was nothing in the river. There's no snow there. The fish couldn't get up the river. They didn't count anything. Here's a bear in the river, looks at them, puts his head down, and starts coming at him. And so they were yelling at it, doing everything. He got no choice, and he had to put it down. And that freaked him out. Now, the bears scat up there for the last month let's go back about a month and a half. Have only been apples. They got no fish. They got no berries. That failed. There was no snow in the mountains. And so now the bear scat only got meat into it. They're eating each
Wow.
other. They're eating each other out there now.
Wow.
I was there last night, and that's what he was telling me.
Wow. Wow. That's, this is the thing. Like this is why I feel like this. I can't just wake up in the morning and go, I'm sick of thinking about this. I'm just not, I'm going to
Doesn't
ignore
work
it.
that way. No,
Because really, we're talking about the
there's nothing more important.
this whole thing, this whole little, what do they got going on in Paris right now is astounding because not one word about Fukushima. Fukushima is the greatest threat to our entire planet right now.
Paris is about all countries accepting the quotations that nuclear is carbon free. And the minute that all countries utter that, then it's acceptable and vital for them all of a sudden now to include nuclear in reducing what they call greenhouse gases. But a nuclear power plant boils 1,000,000 gallons a minute, 1,000,000 gallons a minute. And a glass of salt water, a gallon has 16 glasses, but a glass has 1 billion creatures. And so they evaporate those creatures. And so if you're talking about carbon, that's the worst carbon thing imaginable. But there's 6,000 abandoned mines,
Right, exactly.
right? And then there's all the, I guess, 700 nuclear accidents up on nuclear
And all
proctologists.
the thing is with the nuclear industry is they rely on everything going perfectly well, nothing happening, no accidents on. I mean, the carbon.
Well, they
Just think
rely
about
upon
the
you.
carbon.
They rely upon you believing it's a banana.
That's
They
right.
know they don't rely upon what you like. That's so important. I don't mean to cut you off or belittle what you're saying, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying that this is how they done it to us for 70 years. They told us like a banana, walking sunshine, getting on an airplane, sleeping next to somebody. The natural, normal, indigenous, stupid, everyday background emitters. These are not radiations. You can't make a nuclear weapon. You can't make a dirty bomb. You don't need a nuclear waste site for it. There's no harm. It's only beneficiary. And that they can't mutate a fruit fly. But everything out of Japan, everything out of Chernobyl, everything out of Hanford, everything out of every nuclear power plant will mutate a fruit fly and everything else.
Well,
Period.
look
Right?
what
That's
they're
why we have
telling the
Juris
people.
laws.
Look what they're telling the people in St. Louis. Your child's cancer is not really caused by living 1 mile away from a nuclear dump site all of its life.
Change the law so you can hang these people.
I mean, honestly, it is so outrageous. But my senator Jeff Merkley, he came into office. The first thing he did, one of the first things he did, was submit legislation. He wanted to go to the floor of the House to modify the Price-Anderson Act to make people accountable for the harm they cause. Do you know that the two leading the Republican senator and my own senator, his own co-senator from this state, Ron Wyden, refused to let that legislation go to the floor of the Senate?
Price-Anderson Mitigation Act is what it's really called.
Yes.
It's designed to take away
a liability.
liability to the nuclear industry.
Well, this is how it works.
It's crazy.
The people of St. Louis are now
You can't even
discovering.
insure them.
Well, the people of St. Louis are now discovering they're in catastrophic harm.
They got to get out of there.
They've gotten their senators to do
They're
something.
staying there. They're staying there waiting to get paid for their houses.
That's
waiting
right.
to get their money back. They're morons. Get the frig out of there.
I wouldn't call them.
I'm going to call them morons because they know it's bad. They don't have any illusion about that.
You know what it is?
They're staying there because they want money for their house. I don't blame them, but what's better to do?
Right.
Stay there and hope you'll get something out of it and have a short life anyway because you stayed there, or get out of there and go after them from somewhere else. Say, abandon the property. I'm not going to sell it to anybody else because it's rotten.
It's the normal.
But you don't stay there, right?
It's the normalcy bias. That's what it is. People have been trained to have the normalcy bias. And the other thing is there's hundreds of thousands of people. So,
asking the system to recognize that you screwed me over.
Well, look what the people
is one thing, but staying there and being a prisoner to it. And look, I'm on the West Coast where the radiation is all the time and I'm fine. I'm here because someone got to sacrifice themselves. That's just the way it is before this will ever come out.
Well, I'll tell you what.
I want to go all the time. Trust me, I don't want to be here. I'm here because I know I got to be here. I'll be out of here in a number of months. I'll be getting ready to leave. But I stayed here on purpose. I was ready to go a year and a half ago. Once I discovered what really happened, 100%, and we've covered over 10,000 headlines, so there is no illusions. I've got over 25,000 supporting documentations, 5,000 pictures of the reactors, millions of emails, and that we've covered every piece of the subject. We flushed it out properly before we even went on the ocean. And that when we went on the ocean, and seen that there was truly an extinction event. If people look up the Smithsonian, urchins will be the next sea star wasting victims. They see that they issued earlier this year a mass mortality for sea urchins based upon 4 spots, right? And a 5th spot later. And okay, because they were missing out of those spots, they announced a mass mortality event and that they probably extinction event. But I covered the entire coastline, 15,000 miles, 200,000 pictures, the entire coast. And at the end of it, we done 20 miles of coast right from Alaska all the way down to the other end of Canada. Right, one end to the other end, every 20 miles. And yet, still no media attention, not even mention my name. But alleged take 500 hours of my footage, find a couple of sentences, and then every media found out worthy to come out and demonize me and smear me and accuse me of death threats. Once again, see, you jump back and forth in these conversations. This is, I don't understand people, how they can sit there and not get up in arms about it. I cannot truly wrap my mind around this.
Me too, I'm the same way. I'm on this radio show 3 times a week because I can't.
Because they're demonizing me. Everybody's ignoring the fact there's an extinction event and we documented it. I'm not saying don't look at the other side of it. I'm just saying how come the other side doesn't come out and explain me away? Why don't they get a marine biologist and go over and explain what all those rocks are in my 200,000 pictures? Right. Or why don't they go out and show me a healthy spot? And so if anybody wants to go out and show me a healthy coastline with the 5,600 species, I got a $70,000 Zodiac there you can have. Fully loaded. We'll fuel it up for you. It's got 3 motors on it, aluminum cabin on it, all equipment on it. It's 24-foot Coast Guard. I took it through 15,000 miles. She's good to go. Got a stove on it, beautiful diesel stove. Go down to your shoreline, debunk me. Get down to your shoreline, get yourself a free Zodiac.
That's my thing is like all these people, there were people while you were doing it saying, oh, it's a waste of time. Well, I didn't see these scientists actually offering to help you make this a much more scientific study by, contributing or helping. All they do is really making, in fact, this is really the key issue.
They called up the hotel.
So-called scientists, for me, these so-called scientists intentionally manipulate their scientific studies to show that they're the least amount of harm. It's like them testing the water. They were testing the water.
They got a wheel of fortune. They spin it, and the biggest number on it is 2 barrels.
Yeah, I mean that's the issue. I mean they know scientifically you don't test the water, you test the plant life, you test the animal life if you really want to find out.
Look, Woods Hole and UVic getting all those water samples, and they're not straining it for phytoplankton, please.
That's not even testing.
Please, right? Yeah. Of course they're doing it, but it's just not. They don't mention that. They don't say, "Oh, and we're going to test it." Oh, throw some kelp in because radiation aggregates in plankton and kelps and algae. No, don't. They say in their video, don't.
Dana, I think we're about to get cut off. I want people to visit you at thenuclearproctologist.org. Contribute to Dana's legal fund. He definitely needs our help. Thank you, Dana, for being on our show. I really appreciate your great effort here. It has been.
I get excited. My apologies to anybody.
That's all right. I like you being excited because you know what? It shows that you have some humanity and blood running through your veins, which obviously the nuclear cartel has none. This is not just a pastime. This is about life or death on our planet, and people.
I don't like doing what I'm doing.
If we want to have any species of life on this planet right now, all of us need to put our efforts in to really finding a solution to this, which I believe there is a solution, but we have to face the problem, and they have spent a lot of time 70 years of not facing the issue. So that is the nuclearproctologist.org. His name is Dana Durnford. Please go look at all of his studies, all of his information that he's provided to humanity, and make an effort to contribute to his defense fund because these are pretty serious charges. We're sure he'll beat them, but we need your help. And thank you, Dana, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Lonnie. Good stuff. Good show.
Thank you.